Welcome back, everybody. In the last video, we created this avatar model. It was the first data model in our app, which is pretty exciting. Now, just to remind you guys, we created it as a struct, and all of our data models are going to be structs. We're doing that on purpose because structs, since they are value types, are sendable by default, which means we can very easily use and send them in an asynchronous context. So when we go and start making our async await code, it's much easier to work with structs as the data model than classes. This struct and most of our data models are actually going to be what's called immutable structs. You can go and Google immutable struct if you've never heard that term before, but basically all the data in this struct is a constant, it is a let, and so we know that once we create this data model, the data inside is not going to change, it is immutable. We are not allowing this struct to be mutated from anywhere outside of the struct. And now that we have some data model, we can go and use that to start building some of our UI here. 2 videos back, we created this cell here. We called it the hero cell. In the last video, we created this data model, and now we'll use both of those to create and finish this carousel view here. This carousel, I think, is a really nice UI. We can see as we swipe, the cells kind of scale in from the side. And this is actually all native SwiftUI code. As of iOS 17, we got a bunch of new scroll view modifiers so that we can add paging to scroll views. And that's what this is here. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and create that. If you are unfamiliar with the new paging scroll view modifiers, I will put a link below to a video on my YouTube channel so you can learn all about them. But without further ado, let's get started here and let's start building our carousel view. This carousel view, even though we're only going to use it on this screen, we're going to build it as a reusable component so that in theory we could use it on multiple screens or even in multiple projects. So let's go to our components section, go to our views, and let's right click, create a new file from template, SwiftUI view, and I'm going to call this carousel view. Let's click create. Let's get the preview working here, and I'm going to close the navigator. The first thing we'll do is set up our scroll view. So we're going to have a scroll view, and we know it's going to be a horizontal scroll. Let's click enter on the content, and then in here we're going to add in a lazy H stack. So I'm using lazy H stack because I don't know how many items are going to be in this carousel. Right now it's only 4, but you could imagine that we add way more. I don't want to load all of the images at once. So using a lazy H stack, they will only load as they come onto the screen. Lazy H stack, and we'll open the brackets here. Let's do a for each. And let's do 0 ... less than maybe 5 for now. So we'll have 4 items. Click enter, and then this will be each index. And then for now, let's just put a rectangle on the screen. We're going to give the whole scroll view a frame with a fixed frame with a height of 200. And that should then limit the size of our cells to only 200 pixels high. Let's actually just make this maybe less than 50 for a second so we can actually see the scroll. Alright, so my scroll view is scrolling here. We have this scrolling indicator at the bottom. Let's just hide that quick. We'll do .scroll indicators hidden. And for just 1 second, let's give each of these a frame with a width of maybe 300, just so it looks a little bit more like our actual cells. I'm going to move fast here through our scroll view APIs. Again, I will link the YouTube video below if you really want to learn these in detail. We're going to add the scroll target layout modifier, and then we're going to add the scroll target behavior and make this paging. So now when I scroll, rather than a smooth scroll, it actually pages from cell to cell. As we swipe here, we can see that the paging is not working exactly perfect. The edges of the cell are not lining up with the edges of the device. Let's fix that by on each of these cells, we'll set the container relative frame to the horizontal axis, and we'll align it to the center. So now we should be able to page much more efficiently. I'll get rid of this frame of 300, and now we have our full cells. You can see here that this line, the spacing between each cell, offsets by about 10 pixels every time I go to the next page. The line is moving to the right a little bit at each time. If I go all the way back, the line gets closer to the left edge. And that's because these modifiers do not take into account the spacing between the cells. Let's just go here and make this spacing of 0. And just to see the different cells, let's give this a fill and we'll say if index remainder 2 is equal to 0, color.red, otherwise color.blue. And now I have a paging scroll view. Let's load up some fake data here. So I'm going to create maybe the items, and let's make this an array of avatar model, which is what we made in the last video. And we'll set this equal to avatar model.mocks. This is our mock data array. And let's loop on the avatar models. These models are not identifiable or hashable. Let's go ahead and just make them, we can make them identifiable or hashable. Let's go ahead and use hashable for now. And let's use the hash value of each. And then this in here would be each item in. Let's get this to compile quickly. And now let's put on the screen our hero cell view. And let's triple click, Control M to put it on multiple lines. This will be the item.name, the item.character description, the item.profile image name. And now we have our paging scroll view. A couple more things. When we scroll from the left to the right, we can see that it scales in a little bit. So it's a little bit smaller when it's out to the side, and then it scales up to 100%. That's actually another new scroll view API called scroll transition, which has a configuration and a transition here. I'm going to hold the option button and click enter. Let's make this full screen quickly. The configuration is going to be interactive, meaning as the user is scrolling, and the threshold we're going to add here is when it is visible with an amount of 0.95, so 95%. We don't need the axis, we'll use the default, and then we'll click enter on the transition here. The transition, we're going to name this the content and the phase. And in here, we'll return the content as is, with also a scale effect. So if the phase.identity, when it is in the center of the screen, we'll make this 1, so 100% scale, just the normal size. Otherwise, we'll do 0.9, about 90%. So now when I swipe onto the screen, it should size up a little bit. And that resizing is also going to basically just add some what looks like padding between the cells, but it's really just because the second cell is scaling onto the device. If I wanted to make that more extreme, I could make this maybe 0.5. See much bigger scale onto the screen. So we can see here it scales up to from 50% all the way up to 100%, and it gets to 100% when it is 95% on the screen. If I change this down to like 50%, it should scale up much faster now. Let's make that 0.95 and 0.9. I think sometimes a subtle animation is a little bit better. I don't want to add padding around the edge of the device in this component, but I will add it onto the preview just because that's what it's going to look a little bit more like when we are actually using it in the Explore cell. The last thing we're going to do here is build out a custom little indicator at the bottom so the user can tell that this is swipeable and what index they're at. Because if we didn't have this, this would just look like it's a standard cell and the user wouldn't know that this actually can swipe left and right. So underneath the scroll view, let's add here I'm going to cut this, make a V stack, maybe spacing of 12. And underneath the scroll view, let's go ahead and start adding our little circles here. So again, we're going to have an H stack. Let's do spacing of 8. For each, again, we're going to loop on the items. These items are hashable, so I'll make the hash value here. And for each item, let's just put a little tiny little circle on the screen, and we'll make them fill, and we'll use the accent color for now. And we'll give them a frame, fixed frame of maybe 8 by 8, so they're nice and tiny. Now we're going to need to know which item is actually selected in the scroll view, which one is the current item. So the scroll view actually has a .scroll position modifier in which we can bind to a scroll position. So up here, let's make an @state private var selection of type avatar model, and I'll set it equal to nil to start, and then we will bind to it with the $selection. Swiftlint is telling us this is redundant. Let's just remove the equals nil. I think I actually used the wrong modifier here. This should be scroll position with the ID, and we'll use a hashable binding here. So here we'll do the selection because these avatar models are hashable. And then in order to actually select it, it needs to know that each of these cells have an ID. So in here, we'll use the .id modifier and we'll pass in the item, which is going to be the hash value for each item. And finally, down here, let's just change the color. We're going to say if the item is equal to selection at the top, then we'll use the .accent color. Otherwise, let's use the .secondary color, which should be a gray. Cool. And then the secondary color is a little dark, so maybe we'll do secondary with opacity of 0.5. Great. When this first loads, though, I can see that nothing is selected right now. And that's, I think, just has something to do with how the lazy HStack loads. So let's just do a quick .onAppear. Let's just say if, when it appears, if the selection is equal to nil, then let's set the selection equal to the items.first. Now I've already built this app and I've played around with it, and there's a couple edge cases that I just want to cover and before we move on here, just so that we don't have bugs later in the app. We haven't gotten to actually loading the real data for the app yet for this cell. So right now we're using these fake data, but what we're going to do later on in the course is actually dynamically change the data that's going to show here. As I was saying in an earlier video, this is some of the most important data in our app. This is really important because every user is going to see this and a lot of users are going to interact with this. So I might have some custom algorithms or custom logic that will determine what shows here. And even after something shows here, if the user clicks into something and then comes back, there might be points in the user's life cycle when I actually want to change the data that is in here. Because if the user, for whatever reason, is not interacting with anything in here, then it might be an idea to try some sort of test where we change the data, give them different avatars, different featured items, and see if they interact with those. So there's a chance in our app that we're going to actually change the array after it's already appeared and after it's already created. So I'm just going to make a quick modifier here, .onChange. I'm going to do onChange of, and we'll do the items.count. So if the number of items in the array changes, let's also just update this back to the first one. I don't want to repeat this code, so let's just make it a quick private func. Let's call this update selection if needed. Open the brackets, and I'll paste this in here. We're going to call update selection if needed from both of these. Last but not least, I want to handle another edge case where if the user has swiped all the way to the last item here, and then they don't click anything, I would assume that they're not interested in anything in this avatar row. So maybe they go and they do something else in the app, but the next time this screen appears, I want to reset them back to the first one. Because as the user, the chances of the user actually swiping back manually is pretty low, but if I reset them back to my best data, my best avatar, that might increase their chances of interacting with some of my best content. So just to catch that edge case, let's also say here, or if the selection is equal to the items.last. So if the screen appears and the selection is already the last item, revert it back to the first. And we can see that in practice here. I'm going to go to the last item. Maybe I don't like it. I go to another screen. I come back, and then it resets. Just a little UI trick that I think is going to make our app experience better, but that is something that maybe we want to test later on. Let's wrap up this component on the HStack for these circles. Let's add a quick little bit of animation, and maybe we'll do .linear for onChange of selection. So just to animate the color getting selected and deselecting between the two. And that looks pretty good. The compiler is yelling at us because we didn't actually use these values, so let's just make them underscores quick. And the last thing that we're going to do in this video is actually going to be a challenge. This will be the first difficult challenge for you guys to see if you guys can do it. I would expect that experienced engineers probably can, but if you are a junior or intermediate, this is probably going to be quite difficult, but let's see if you guys can do it. Right now we have built the carousel view, and we have tightly coupled it to the avatar model and to the hero cell view. So the only way I can use the carousel view right now is with this cell and with this data model. But I want to make the carousel view totally reusable. I want to be able to use it with basically any type of data and any view. So my challenge to you guys is to decouple this view from both the data model and the cell that is going to be rendered. I'm going to give you guys a couple quick hints just to get you going. The first thing that I would do is work on this cell here. Rather than having a hero cell view, maybe we inject some view into the carousel view. Secondly, rather than having an array of items, we know that these items need to be hashable because we're using this hash value here, and we're using the hash value for the ID. So rather than injecting an array of avatar model, maybe we inject an array of hashable items. Go ahead and pause the video and see if you guys can do it yourself. And if not, I'm going to go ahead and do it now. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of the dependency to this view. So rather than having a view here, I just want this to be some generic content. I don't know what that content's going to be yet. So maybe up here I have some sort of view builder, var, and I'll call this content. And content, of course, we want to be some view. But we can't use some view, so instead let's declare a generic type content. And content will be anything that conforms to view. So then I will pass the content here. Let's go ahead and update our preview quickly. So CarouselView, and we pass in the content. I'll click enter here. On the content, I'm going to pass in my hero cell view. Let's get this on multiple lines. Now the problem here is that in this content closure, we don't have the actual item that we are looping on. We need this to really show us the item in as we had it here. We need that, as we had it here, we need that item back. So we need this content closure, this view builder, to accept an item so that we can use it here. So rather than just being a function that returns content, let's make this a function that accepts an avatar model and returns content. So now when I create the content, I have to pass in an avatar model, which I'll pass in the item. Down here, I should now be able to do item.name, item.character description, item.image name, profile image name. Let's see if that renders. Awesome. So we've decoupled carousel view from the cell, but now we need to decouple it from the avatar model. So rather than injecting an array of avatar model, let's just inject an array of some type. Let's call that type T, and I'll make this T. And we won't use the mocks anymore. We can't use the mocks because this is a generic type. And of course, we're not going to pass back avatar model, we'll pass back type T. The selection also is going to have to be T. Now we're getting compiler errors that T must conform to hashable. So let's declare that T is anything that conforms to the hashable protocol. So when we create carousel view, we're going to inject an array of items. Those items conform to the hashable protocol. So down here, when I create a carousel view, let's pass in an array of hashable items. So maybe I'll do avatar model.mocks, and I'll click enter here, and this will be each item in. And then I'll put my hero cell up here as well. And just like that, we have decoupled our component from both the cell and the data type that is being injected into it. Leave a comment below if you were able to do it without my help. That was a pretty difficult one. I wouldn't expect most people to be able to do it, but I think it is a good learning experience. That's all for this video, so let's go ahead and Option Command C. Let's call this a feature, and we'll name this the carousel view. Let's stage all and commit, and then let's go ahead and push this up to GitHub. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.